Hi, I'm Dr. Renee Hackney. Welcome to part 2 in our series on managing tantrums. In the first part, we talked about a few basic things to know about tantrums. That included the age guidelines and the difference between a child just expressing negative emotion versus tantruming. Today, we're going to talk about long-term prevention, things that parents can be doing that in the long run will lessen the frequency, maybe the intensity or duration of those tantrums. The first long-term way to prevent tantrums is teaching children emotion language. Again, you are their emotion coach. You are there to help them learn to manage emotions, help them learn to better express emotions, calm down from emotions. And part of that is just them having all of that emotion language. And so the idea first is just to talk about emotions in the moment when they happen. And that might be your emotions as a parent. That might be acknowledging child's emotions. That might be talking about other people's emotions out in the world. And so starting with parents' emotions. Those are called I messages when you are letting people know how you feel in a productive way. And so as a parent, if you are angry or frustrated, it's actually okay to say this. It's good to say this. I am frustrated. This is a mess. I'm upset. This is taking too long. The idea of it is you're expressing negative emotion if it's there. I'm angry, I'm frustrated. It's actually good to label this even with a little 16-month-old. What you're saying is this is frustrated or this is angry. And that's a good life lesson. They already know if they're in the room that something's up. They hear your voice, they see your face, and you're just giving it that label. You're helping them learn something from that moment. And so the idea of I'm angry, this is a mess, or I'm upset, no one is listening. You just want to be sure it's given as what's called an I message, so you avoid what's called a you message. A you message is where you blame the child directly. I'm mad at you, you made a mess. I am so frustrated, this is taking you too long. You want to take the you out of that blame language. When you have a you message there, I'm mad, you are making such a mess, the you makes the listener feel defensive and it kind of closes down that communication with the child. And so good to label your emotion, but the idea there is you want to be sure you're avoiding that you blame. Empathy is validating your child's emotions. And this is saying something like, I know you're angry. You didn't like that game. I know you're upset. This is really frustrating. You're letting the child know you understand how they feel. Labeling their emotions over time, the more you do that, the more they start to be able to use that language themselves. And by the time a child gets to kindergarten, I want them to be able to walk up to their friend and say, I am mad at you, you took my block, rather than hurt that child. And so the idea is giving them this language can be very helpful. It's also talking about other people's emotions. So let's say you're at the playground with your 4-year-old and there is some other kid at the playground just freaking out angry. It can be helpful once you've past that child, maybe once you're on your way home, to say, did you see that kid? He was so angry. Have you ever been that angry? What would calm you down if you were that angry? So the idea of it is to just talk about emotions often. And when they see emotions out in the world, good to give it a label, good to have some discussion. There are so many other ways to teach emotions, though. You can role play emotional situations. You can give puppet shows about emotional situations. You can ask hypothetical questions. How would you feel if this happened? How would you feel if that happened? What would you say? What would you do? And the idea there is they're getting some practice at thinking about emotions when they're not in it. You might do art projects about emotions, and this is where you might make an emotion poster and you divide a big poster board into 6 squares, and we would label that as happy, sad, angry, scared, excited, and surprised. And then kids can either draw pictures in those squares or they can cut out faces from magazines that look like those faces, those emotions. They might cut out things that make them feel that way. Older kids might write some words in each of the squares and some comments about when they felt that way or things that make them feel that way. As children are getting just a little bit older, 4 or 5-year-olds, you might also start talking about what's the causes and consequences of emotions. So good for children to start to learn that there's triggers, the causes, and there's the outcomes, the behaviors after the emotions. When I talk to kids about kind of the causes or consequences of emotions, we call it before, during, and after. And I'll start with something like, here's the number 2. What comes before the number 2? And they say, 1, you go, yeah, that's easy. What comes after? And they say 3 or 4, and you go, yeah, that's right. Let's try a harder thing. milk spills in the kitchen, or the dog is barking at the door, and you say, what comes before that? And if it's the dog, they might say they saw a squirrel in the yard or a car drove by, and you go, yeah. What comes after that? And they say, my mom lets the dog out, or we calm the dog down. And then you can get to the emotions and you say, okay, here's a harder one. You get really, really angry. What could have come before that? And they say, my sister took my toy, or my mom wouldn't let me play. You say, what comes after that? And they say, I stomp up to my room. And the idea is you want children to start to recognize there's things that trigger the emotions that they can deal with in better ways. And then there's the outcome from the emotion, what they tend to do afterwards. And they've actually got some control there. They're making some choices there. So good as they're getting toward kindergarten to be learning at least the before, the during, the after. You also might just read storybooks about emotions. There are so many children's storybooks, like When Sophie Gets Angry, Really, Really Angry, or Mouse Got Mad. If you go on our website, The Parenting by Dr. Renee, and then click at the top Children's Books, there's a list of books there by topic, and there's probably a good 15 or 20 emotion books there that might be helpful for teaching your children about all this emotion language. You could play charades and have emotions as a category. You can draw pictures of things that make them feel happy or sad, or you can draw faces. You can make faces. The whole family can line up at the mirror and say, okay, we're all going to make an angry face, and then look at each other, and it's kind of funny. But point out, how can we tell when someone is angry? What does it look like? And talk about how, their facial expression matches that emotion. The idea is the more emotion language they have, the less they may need to fall to pieces, the less they can get overwhelmed because they're able to better communicate with you. Another long-term way to coach children to lessen that emotion and lessen the amount of tantrums they have is teaching them ways to calm down. So teaching them emotion language is one way in long-term prevention. Another, teaching them ways to calm. So for a child learning how to calm down, unfortunately, most parents wait until the child is so angry, so bent out of shape, and they say, okay, let's take some deep breaths. That is not the time to be teaching anyone anything new. When they are really angry or frustrated, they're not able to participate with you in that way. And so when you're teaching kids ways to calm down, like breathing or counting, the things we're about to talk about, you want to do this when all is well. Like when you're having snack or when you're tucking them into bed at night. That's when I might say, hey, let's practice taking 5 deep breaths. And everybody practices. And you go, wow, wasn't that relaxing? And after on the 4th or 5th night, you might say, when you get really mad, you know what you can do is take these 5 deep breaths. And that can be a way to help the child learn to do it when they're not at a moment of freaking out. A few things you might do before you start teaching them ways to calm. One is make a calm down space in the house. In our house, this was a corner of the couch with a bunch of blankets and a couple stuffed animals. And the idea is that if anybody started to feel frustrated, they could go snuggle up in the blankets. One mom said her calm down spot was a cardboard box with a door cut out and some flashlights inside. And she said, how can you be angry when you got flashlights inside a box? And so it's thinking about a place in your house where children might go to calm down. Now, this is not a discipline spot. So this is not a timeout spot. This is a place where they'd want to be and a good place to calm down. You might also make some calm down boxes. So one of the preschools that I work at often has a couple of boxes in every room. It's little shoe boxes. And they're just filled with little Matchbox cars, little Play-Dohs, things like that. And when a child is feeling really upset or frustrated over something, if they need some time to cool off, the teacher will just open one of the little boxes near them. And the idea is they can use those things as a distraction. Ways to actually help them calm. One is you might teach them about taking those deep breaths. At another one of my preschools, we use breathing shapes, and this is cutting out maybe a star or a rectangle, and you put a dot in one corner, and you say to the child, when you need to take some deep breaths, you put your fingers on that dot, and then take 1 deep breath for every corner. And on a star, that's 5 deep breaths. That may help them to manage that task, or to even distract them a little more from the upset. You might also teach kids to sniff a flower and blow out a candle. And so that's just taking a really deep breath. So it's sniff the flower, take a really deep breath in through your nose, and then blow it out. Blow out the candle. Some kids may do better with counting tasks, and when kids are little, this might just be telling them to count slowly to 10 or count backwards from 10. As kids are getting a little older, you want something maybe a little more challenging, a little more distracting, and that might be counting up by threes or counting down by threes. It's the idea that they're going to distract themselves from the emotion with that counting task. As kids are getting a little older toward elementary school, with counting, you might also teach them, if they're starting to feel frustrated or upset about something, to look around the room and take inventory of something. So this might be counting tiles on the ceiling, or this might be counting stripes across the floor, if that's what's in the room. And the idea is when you stop to count something, it's a distraction for you. It takes your mind off of the upset, at least for a moment or two. Another way to calm and help children learn to calm, it's called visual counting. And so somewhere by about 4 years old, visual counting might be helpful. I tend to ask kids, what's your favorite sport? And if they say soccer, I'm going to say, okay, what I want you to do is I want you to close your eyes and I want you to picture yourself kicking that soccer ball into the goal. So close your eyes. Are you ready? Okay, kick the ball. Keep your eyes closed. You're going to go back and do it again. And you teach them 4 times or 5 times in a row to see themselves kicking that soccer ball. If you do this for a few days in a row, on the 3rd or 4th day, you might go, okay, now when you get really frustrated about something, and you need to calm down, you can close your eyes and think about that soccer ball and kick into the goal. And you're teaching them a distraction task from the emotion. What you might also teach them, muscle relaxation. And so with some kids, it's sitting in a quiet spot and saying, okay, we're gonna sit still, and what I want you to do is I want you to tighten your shoulders and relax your shoulders. And now tighten your elbows and relax your elbows. And you're just teaching them to focus on one part of their body at a time and really relax. All of these things, if you hadn't noticed already, are really just distractions. They're meant to distract the child from thinking about the thing that was so upsetting or the thing that they got so riled up about. It's to give them time to just calm down for a minute. Fully describing something might be easier. Fully describing is, if you're starting to feel upset, it's looking around the room, and if there's a painting in the room, you might stop and just for about a minute, fully describe that thing. It's focusing your attention on that. There are also mindfulness ways and meditation ways to teach kids how to calm down. There are children's storybooks like Mind Bubbles or Sit Like a Frog that teach kids about mindfulness or about early steps in toward meditation. And those, again, are just ways to bring a sense of calm. There are also children's storybooks about calming down in general. There's a book called Sea Otter Cove and another book, A Boy and a Bear, that are storybooks that have a theme in the storybook about calming down or have some skills built into the book about calming down. You might also go on our blog, The Parenting by Dr. Renee, and search the word calm. In a blog post, I've written up a lot of these ways with a few links to books or other resources for helping children learn to calm. How all this is related to tantrums: the more emotion language they have, the less they may tend to tantrum. The more they're able to learn to calm themselves down, to distract themselves away from that upset, the less they may tantrum. In part 3, our next part on tantrums, we're going to talk about the short-term ways, kind of in-the-moment ways to avoid the tantrums. In part 4, we'll talk about what to do once the tantrum starts, so you have a good game plan. And then in part 5, we'll talk about the role of intermittent reinforcement, meaning the pattern of how you respond and why you want to be consistent when there's tantrums. Thank you so much for joining me today.